So, talking about Glasl's 9-stage model of conflict escalation. So, welcome everybody to this lesson. My name is Sascha Ferz and I'm from the University of Graz. And it is a pleasure for me to explain you an interesting conflict escalation model like this so-called 9-stage model of conflict escalation, which was developed by Friedrich Glasl, an Austrian conflict researcher. Why could it be useful to know something about this escalation model, you may ask yourself? Well, this model is used as a diagnostic tool by conflict facilitators. This kind of facilitators could not only be negotiators or mediators, but also attorneys of law. They all have to help their parties to choose the appropriate dispute resolution method, and the model can support the choice. But it is also valuable as a means for sensitizing people to the mechanism of conflict escalation. This model very clearly describes the way in which social conflicts typically evolve. The basic underlying principle is that conflicts have an inherent tendency to escalate if specific measures are not taken to confine them. The model describes observable phenomena that occur in conflicts and put them in linear sequences. This makes it possible to determine the extent to which the conflict has already escalated. Then conclusions with respect to possible ways of managing the conflict can be derived. By the way, a good possibility to understand this model is to watch the film War of Roses, directed by Danny DeVito. But first, let's go through the 9 levels now. Stage 1. The tension. Tension is also a good word. Please give your attention also to the slides you will see in the video. So this makes it for you easier to understand what I want to explain you in the next time. The first stage of conflict escalation develops when a difference over some issues or frustration in a relationship proves resilient to resolution efforts. The problem remains and leads to irritation. Repeated efforts to overcome the difficulties fail, which means that the natural flow of shifting concerns is blocked. The parties are repeatedly reminded that in a particular field they are not getting forward. Interests and opinions crystallize into standpoints. These standpoints tend to become mutually incompatible in the perception of the conflict parties. The communication between the parties is still based on mutually. The basic status of the involved persons as responsible human beings is recognized, and one tries to be fair in the interactions. The threshold to the stage 2 is taken when one or both parties loses faith in the possibility of solving the problems through straight and fair discussions. When straight argumentation is abandoned in favor of tactical and manipulative argumentative tricks, the conflict slips into stage 2. So stage 2, which is called debates and polemics. Since the counterpart doesn't seem amenable to sensible arguments, discussions tend to develop into verbal confrontations. The parties look for more forceful ways of pushing through their standpoints. The dispute is no longer restricted only to a well-defined issue, but the parties start to feel that their general position is at stake. This means that mistrust is growing and they divert more and more attention to how they appear, being successful, strong and skillful, rather than compliant, insecure, and incompetent. The frustrating experiences lead to the build-up of tensions, which are often discharged in outbursts. Such acts serve as valves for letting out pressure, but do not involve any real problem solving. Repeated experiences of the counterpart lead to the formation of images of typical behavior patterns. The threshold to stage 3 is related to the basic right of each party to be heard in matters of mutual interest. When one party feels that further talking is useless and starts acting without consulting the other side, the conflict slips into stage 3. So we arrived in actions and not words. At stage 3, the parties no longer believe that further talk will resolve anything, and they shift their attention to actions. Common interests and the prospect of resuming cooperation receding into the background, and the parties see each other as competitors. The most important goal at this stage is to block the counterpart from reaching his goal and to push through one's own interest. The feeling of being blocked is further increased by the limited possibility genuine verbal communication. So the parties doesn't talk to each other anymore. The parties start to see themselves as being held captives by external circumstances they cannot control. They therefore tend to deny responsibility for the cause of events. An increasing part of their own actions are regarded as necessary responses to the behavior of the other side. The threshold to stage 4 is willed attacks on the counterpart's social reputation, general attitude, position, and relationship to others. Deniable punishment behavior is a characteristic sign of slipping into stage 4. Stage 4, which is called images and coalitions. At this fourth stage, the conflict is no longer about concrete issues, but about victory and defeat. Defending one's reputation is a major concern. The typicals that evolved at stage 2 and 3 are now consolidated and complemented into full-blown, general and consistent images of the counterpart. These images are stereotypical, highly fixed, and are very resilient to change through new information. Such images serve an important role in providing a sense of orientation. One has the feeling of knowing what to expect from the environment. A salient symptom of stage 4 dynamics is the difficulty of the parties to mention positive qualities of the counterpart when asked by a facilitator. The other side is thought of as uneducable. Such people are unable to change. In this stage, the parties actively try to enlist support from bystanders. Actions to enhance one's image in the eyes of others are planned and implemented. The parties also consciously seek to stage their confrontations in public in order to recruit supporters. The threshold to stage 5 is constituted by acts that lead to a public loss of face for one or maybe both parties. If the basic honor of someone is offended repeatedly and deliberately, in particular in a public setting, the conflict is highly likely to slip into stage 5, which means loss of face. The transition to stage 5 is particularly dramatic. The word phase signifies here the basic status a person has in a community of people. The phase is reproduced by the members of a group by their avoiding any overt actions that challenge the basic status a person has. The phase is heard by public events, not by private gossip or individual opinions. Loss of phase means that the conflict parties feel that they have suddenly seen through the mask of the other party and discovered an immoral, insane, or criminal insight. The whole conflict history is now reinterpreted. One feels that the other side has followed a consequent and immoral strategy from the very beginning. All their constructive moves were only deceptive covers for their real intentions. There is no longer ambiguity, but everything appears very clear. There are only two sides from now on, angels and devils. One's own side is a representative of the good forces in the world, whereas the other side represents the destructive, subhuman and bestial forces. Such efforts may now dominate the conflict process. Loss of phase and ensuing retaliatory acts often isolate the conflict parties from bystanders. This may further exacerbate the escalation mechanism because the opportunities for getting tempering feedback about the conflict are reduced. The threshold to stage 6 is felt to be less dramatic than to stage 5. When the parties start to issue ultimata and strategical threats, the conflict enters stage 6. So that's strategies of threats. Since no other way seems to be open, the conflict parties resort to threats of damaging actions in order to force the counterpart in the desired direction. The strategical threats of stage 6 are very different from the deniable punishment actions characteristic of stage 4. The latter mainly serve the function of giving vent to pent-up frustrations. Strategical, the threats are actively used in order to force the counterpart to certain concessions. One consequence of this dynamic is that the parties increasingly lose control over the course of events. By their own actions, they create a pressure to act rapidly and radically. In this phase, the conflict becomes increasingly complex, difficult to grasp, and impossible to control. In order to retain some measures of control, each party insists that its own issues and standpoints must be dealt with in exactly the form they have chosen to present them. A serious risk in stage 6 is that stress, uncontrollable aggressive actions, and increasing turbulence and complexity leads to disintegration of the parties into smaller units acting autonomously. When this happens, not even binding agreement between the main actors may stop the destructiveness. The threshold to stage 7 is the fear of the consequences that might follow if the threats are carried out. When the parties actively seek to harm the other side's sanctions potential, the conflict transforms to stage 7. Threat strategies only work as long as parties believe that a threat may act deterring. However, the very internal dynamics of stage 6 drive the parties to translate the threats into actions. So we come to stage 7 with the limited destructive blows. The threats of stage 6 undermine the basic sense of security of the parties. Now they expect the counterpart to be capable of very destructive acts. Securing one's own further survival becomes an essential concern. It is no longer possible to see a solution that includes the counterpart. The counterpart is regarded as an impediment that must be eliminated by targeted attacks aiming to the other. The counterpart is now a poor enemy. No human dignity stands in the way of the attacks. The enemy is just an object standing in the way. This may go as far as using words like eliminate and exterminate when discussing what to do. There is no longer any real communication. At stage 6, the threat strategies build upon at least a minimum of communication. One must know if the counterpart rejects or accepts an ultimatum. In stage 7, each party is only concerned with expressing their own message, and they don't care about how it is received. The parties see that it is no longer possible to win. It is a lose-lose struggle. Survival and less damage than the counterpart suffers are the main goals. The threshold to stage 8 is attacks that are directly aimed at the core of the counterpart, attacks that are intended to shatter the enemy or destroy his vital system. We are now in stage 8, fragmentation of the enemy. At this stage, the attacks intensify and aim at destroying the vital systems and the basis of power of the adversary. One may specifically aim at fragmenting the counterpart into ineffectual splinters and at the ability of the counterpart to make decisions. Negotiators, representatives, and leaders may be targeted in order to destroy their legitimacy and power in their own camp. The attacks on the counterpart targets all signs of vitality. The main objective is now to destroy the extense basis of the adversary. The only restraining factor is the concern for one's own survival. The threshold to stage 9 is reached when the self-preservation drive is given up. When this happens, there is no check at all on further destructiveness. So we come to the final stage, number 9, together into the abyss. In the last stage of conflict escalation, the drive to annihilate the enemy is so strong that even the self-preservation instinct is neglected. Not even one's own survival counts. The enemy shall be exterminated even at the price of destruction of one's own very existence as an organization, group, or individual. Ruin, bankruptcy, prison sentences, physical harm, nothing matters any longer. All bridges are burnt, there is no return. A total war of destruction without scruples and remorse is waged. There are no innocent victims, no neutral parties. The only remaining concern in the race towards the abyss is to make sure that the enemy will fall too. Coming to the end, these escalation levels should be viewed as a model. In reality, they are not always to be observed in their poor form and not always in the sequence. At the beginning of the resentment phase, which means phase 1 to 3, self-help is certainly possible. We can expect a win-win solution. This means that one party tries to cut off the escalation on their own initiative. Towards the end of this phase, as well as in the exchange of blow phase, so 4 to 6, a neutral third party, such as a mediator, is necessary to settle the conflict. Once the destruction, the lose-lose phase is reached, so step 7 and higher, or however you want to see where the steps go into the basement, so lower, only a powerful intervention can help with the forcible separation of the parties to the conflict. Once again, we are talking about a model which helps in analyzing a conflict process, but does not give answers to solve conflicts. Many thanks. Take care.